Well, greetings, you amazing students, and welcome back to another lecture for Sci 120 Lifespan Development. I'm excited to bring this content to you this week. We're going to talk about a topic that may be of personal interest to you, and we're going to talk about it from a psychological standpoint, and we're going to talk about a few different topics today. But we're going to start with topic number one. We're going to talk about dating throughout the lifespan, okay? And we're going to talk about dating throughout the lifespan because many of you may say to yourselves, dating, why would we be discussing that in a psychology course? Well, as it turns out, dating actually has a specific function from a psychological standpoint. There's a reason why human beings seek relationships with other people, and dating is one of those processes in which human beings establish relationships and intimacy with one another. So, for today, one of the topics we're going to discuss is dating and its function from a psychological standpoint across the lifespan. Now, the other component which we're going to discuss is the notion specifically of online dating. Now, the reason we're going to discuss online dating is because over the past few years, we've seen a shift in the United States where now the majority of individuals who are dating throughout our country have shifted in some way to an aspect, not maybe completely, but they are also trying online dating. So you are one of the first generations to enter into a dating space where online dating is also paired with in-person dating. And we're going to discuss some of the implications, thoughts, considerations you should have regarding online dating. The other topics we're going to discuss today are human sexuality. So we're going to discuss what is human sexuality, how is that different from our previous lessons on gender and gender identity? And we're going to discuss that as well. And then finally, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss health disparities that are particularly impacting the LGBTQ plus community. Why are we doing that? Is because in your future careers as a healthcare professional, working in the field of nursing or speech pathology, one of the things that you will do is you will encounter individuals who have different sexual orientations, maybe from your own, who are members of the LGBTQ plus community. And in particular, the LGBTQ plus community is disproportionately impacted in certain respects to healthcare. And so we're going to discuss those to boost your knowledge of some of the challenges that this particular community faces in regards to your future career of nursing or speech pathology. And then finally, we're going to round that out with a biblical worldview, and we're going to discuss a little bit about what it means to serve individuals who may come from different backgrounds from ourselves. All right, so that's what we've got on the agenda for today. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and share our screen, and we're going to dive into the lecture content for today. All right, now, as I promised you, we're going to start with the discussion on dating. Now, many of you may have different thoughts or ideas around dating. Some of you may have been dating from a young age, right? And here's the interesting thing. What do we define as dating? Like, what is considered a date when you're in middle school or high school or college? Some of you may be saying, I'm starting in that dating process of meeting individuals that maybe I'd like to get to know better. Maybe there's a potential for a long-term relationship there. Or some of you may be saying, I'm not dating yet, but I can see myself doing that in the future if I meet the right person. Interestingly enough, when we talk about dating, people have different ideas around why people date, okay? And so we're going to discuss that in general. But from a psychological standpoint, dating is significant. What is the function of dating in terms of, the worldview, or I'm sorry, the perspective from a psychological perspective? Well, dating has a couple of functions. The function of dating is to learn how to establish intimacy with one another. So we have learned in our relationships or in our lives by watching others in their relationships what a relationship will look like, either good or bad, right? We look at the relationships of maybe our parents, our grandparents, our friends, and their parents, or whatever the case is. And that all starts to shape in our mind, one, what is the purpose of dating? And two, it sets a model for us on how do we establish intimacy with one another. We learn all that. Dating gives us a place where we practice that. We develop that, okay? Dating has other functions too. Some people date for entertainment, right? They're bored, they want to have fun on a Friday night, they want to go out with someone, get to know them, maybe go watch a movie, have a meal, whatever the case is. So maybe it's pure entertainment. We see, like, especially you'll see this in the celebrity worlds, right? Dating can even have status and establishing one's own sense of confidence or self-worth. We see these power couples or celebrities get together. They take their two names and combine them into one, and people date to boost awareness, right, about maybe themselves, their career, their status, or even their brand, right? So it depends, right, on the individual and what they're looking for from a dating experience. Early on in our lifespan, though, especially when we're younger, dating really lacks true depth or intimacy, right? And that's because we're learning how to establish intimacy with one another. So when we're first dating, we're really only concerned with a few things. Maybe we're concerned with compatibility. Does the other person like or have interest in areas that I like and have interest in? Maybe it's about looks, right? When you're dating and maybe you're selecting a potential partner purely based on looks. Maybe it's purely based off of money, right? Some people look at dating and they say, look, I want to date someone that potentially could lead me to a lifestyle that I want to live. Either way, though, early in our dating years, it truly, or begins to really truly lack a sense of intimacy or depth. Now, later in life, the older we get, intimacy may come when we're saying to ourselves, I'm no longer looking to date for entertainment or for status, but I'm actually intending to date someone because I'm looking for someone that I can marry, right? Spend the rest of my life with. And so our process, our worldview of dating begins to deepen, and we begin to be more interested in what is that person, what are their values, what are their goals, where are they headed in life? Do I see myself with them in a long-term situation, right? Now, it's also important to consider that certain groups of individuals, there may be other dynamics at play for them. Let's take, for example, individuals who may identify as gay or lesbian, right? Individuals in the early stages when they're young, say middle school or high school, when they're first starting to date, but they also identify as gay or lesbian, may have other factors to consider. Maybe individuals in that realm may be forced to date or pushed to date outside of their preferred partner's identity, meaning someone else who's gay or lesbian, maybe someone who's straight, right? And may find partners are unwilling to identify themselves as gay or lesbian. And the reason for that is that societal pressure, right? The fear is if I come out, if I disclose my identity to other people, that could get, potentially problematic for me, people's other reactions to that. And so, one, they may say, I'm not going to out myself. I'm not going to share my identity. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to date, but I'm going to date in that sense of more of a sense of a societal accepted viewpoint, even if it's not um, who I choose to love or find attractive. Okay. Now, let's also look at dating and considerations from a cultural standpoint. There's also intercultural relationships, right? A blend of like races, ethnicities, people from different cultures, people that may speak different languages. Maybe even it's a culture of class, right? A wealthy individual who's also dating someone who comes from a lower socioeconomic status. We factor that in. It's not only about, and some of you may have this experience, if you've dated, right, in a multicultural, cross-cultural relationship, is that parents have opinions that they weigh in on, grandparents have opinions that they weigh in on both sides of that relationship, right? And so sometimes there's a fear, right, of individuals saying, hey, if you date outside of your ethnicity or your religion or your race or your income, you're bound to encounter, right, some sort of conflict in terms of values, compatibility, whatever the case is. All of these reasons impact functions of dating. They guide us through the process of navigating these complex sort of social systems that we face every single day. So as it turns out, dating really has a significant impact on our development. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a slide with you. Little bit of an embarrassing slide, but I'm going to throw back an old school photo and share a little bit about dating. And I want to ask you a question, okay? On this next screen, you're going to see a picture. And on the picture here, let's go to the right picture here. You know who this is? That's your professor. That's your professor. That's me at 20 years old. 20 years old, okay? And many moons ago, as you can see. And this is who would later become my wife. At the time, we had just started dating. And some of you may not know this, but back in the day, right, in the late 90s, early 2000s, when you became a couple, you had to solidify that by going to the mall and getting pictures, right? You had portraits taken. And so you go to the mall, there was always a portrait studio that was there. You would pick out your package, right? You would go and coordinate, what are you going to wear that day? How do you want to look? How's your hair and all that kind of stuff? And you went and took these pictures, right? And so this was a picture of me and my wife. And this was taken about 24 years ago, 24 years ago. Okay. Fast forward, fast forward to today. And this is us now, right? My wife, me, and our daughter, Zayana. So we didn't know it when we were young at that time, that when we first met and found each other interesting and started to kind of discuss where we were headed in life and what we enjoyed doing in that moment, what we were studying in school, because we met in an undergrad class. English literature is what we met in. Sorry, African American literature is what we met in. It was an early class in the morning. Um, we didn't know. We didn't know it would lead to a marriage of so far nearly 20 years and being together for 24 years, right? We didn't know it would lead to a family. We didn't know it would lead to a house. We didn't know it would lead to a daughter. It was just two kiddos, right, who had met and eventually, right, fell in love with one another. And so that was our dating stage, right, early on. Now I'm going to ask you a question. When does the dating stage end, right, in in our lifespan? I'm going to ask you that question one more time. Kind of think about that. When does this dating stage end in a relationship, right? So think about that for a second. Now, some of you may be saying, well, the dating stage would end maybe after you got married, right? Like, because you're not dating anymore, you're married. So now you continue on with married life. Some of you may say to yourself, the dating stage ends when you decide it's done yourselves, right? Some of you may say maybe the dating age or the dating stage never ends. And what I would tell you after, over 20, almost 20 years of marriage, 24 years of being together as a couple, I would tell you that from my experience, the dating stage, it never ends. The dating stage never ends. Not if you want your relationship to be healthy and happy, right? And so even though my wife and I have been married as long as we have, even though we have a daughter, even though we have a mortgage, even though we have careers, right? We're both heavily involved in our careers. We still make time to date. We still go out to dinner. We still go to movies, right? We still find time spending joy with one another. Maybe it's a museum. Nowadays, I'm old school, right? We love to go antiquing. I'll just say that, right? Or maybe we go to a car show together because I love cars, right? We go dating. And the process of dating has changed. When we date, how we date, what we do on a date, what we discuss on a date, that all shifts, right? Because we're getting older, our priorities change. But at the same time, the dating stage never ends, right? If you want to stay in love with your partner, if you want to deepen your relationship with your partner, you keep dating, right? You stay dating. You make time for one another the same way you make time for work, the same way you make time for doctor's appointments or your daughter's or your kiddo's schedule, right? It stays a part of the relationship. And so I wanted to share that with you just from a personal standpoint, right, of this notion of dating. Now, here's what I want to ask you. Some of you who are maybe more serious about the dating game here, right, are saying, look, Dr. Mako, I have a list. I know exactly what I'm looking for in a partner. Some of you are saying, I have no idea what I'm looking for in a partner, but I'll know when I know, all of those things. It's important to really kind of think about this based on where you are in your lifespan right now. You're in your younger years of your lifespan. You are maybe dating, where you've got a history, a little bit of dating, and you're determining on where is this going to go in my life as you engage in this process of selecting a partner maybe to spend the rest of your life with. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'd like you to make a list of the 10 most important characteristics you are looking for from a partner when you are dating, okay? Even if you're not dating right now, what are the top 10, okay, most important characteristics you are looking for from a partner? I'm going to ask you to write those down. Write those down, okay? We're going to do this activity. Now, you can push pause while we're doing this, right? And that's okay. And then come back when you've got your list to the recording. But before you do that, I'm going to also then ask you, look at that list, just get those 10 things down. And then I'm going to ask you to prioritize them from number one being the most important thing you are looking for from your partner, the characteristics, if you were to date, and then 10 being still important, but the least of those 10, right? I want you to do that. Make your list, prioritize your list, and then go ahead and come back to the lesson and we'll pick up from there, okay? So you can pause me here. All right. Now, here's what I want you to consider, right? If you've made your list, you've made your top 10, look at the top 3 items on your list. What are the top 3 most important characteristics you are looking for from a partner? Maybe that is trust. Maybe that's looks, right? Who knows? No judgment. I'm just saying, maybe that's looks. Maybe it's stability. Maybe it's education. Maybe it's values. Maybe it's someone who's faith oriented, right? And has a relationship with God and his church going. Whatever the case is, look at your top three. Chances are those top three items on your list are your non-negotiables. You know in your heart of hearts, right, that if those top three items aren't present in your partner, chances are it's going to be difficult to have a lifelong, I'm not saying long, even long term, I'm talking a lifelong relationship with that partner. Why is that important? Because as we date throughout the lifespan, as you meet people along the way, you may find yourself dating a few folks. And at times there may be other items that are on your list that aren't on theirs. Or at times you look at those top three, and because something else catches your interest about them, you start to look at that top three on your list and you say, maybe that's a number five. Maybe I can move that value, that my number one value down to number six on my list. I would caution us with that, right? Because oftentimes what we want to make sure of is that we're not compromising a bit of ourselves, right, in terms of selecting a partner for life. You always want to consider what life is going to look like down the road, not only in the moment when you're dating, not only later that month or at the 6 month mark or the year, but what is life going to look like if you are not compatible in those non-negotiable areas when you have kids? When you've got to get the kids to school and back, or to soccer practice or volleyball? What are you going to do when you have to pay bills together? What are you going to do when it comes time to vote? What are you going to do when you have to make decisions around where to live, where to work, right? How much your mortgage payment's going to be? What car do you drive? Do you have one combined bank account, or do you split those bank accounts and you contribute to a community pot, right, to pay the bills? It only gets more complex, right? And so what I would say to you is you want to be firm in who you are and take time to reflect upon who you are and what your values are before you go out into that dating world. And you have to have enough confidence to be able to say, this person was maybe very nice. This person was very kind. This person was maybe very attractive. This person was maybe very wealthy. And at the end of the day, that compatibility of those top three things matter to me, right? So just something for us to think about, right? Now, I want to go into online dating statistics. And the reason for this is because over the course of the last 10 years or so, we've seen a significant shift in the United States where now the majority of individuals who are dating are saying, I'm also using online dating as a method to meet new people, to get to know them, and to explore this notion of compatibility. It doesn't mean that they've moved over entirely to online dating and they're not looking for a partner, out in the course of school or work or shopping or, going out and celebrating with friends. But what they're saying is, I'm using online dating as one of the tools to meet a potential partner. Online dating has been around for a long period of time, but it was only within the last decade that we saw a shift in the United States where now the majority of individuals have said, I'm also using online dating as a tool. So I want to share some statistics with you specifically regarding online dating. There are approximately 54 million single people in the US. That's a funny statistic, right? Because it seems like a lot. And yet some of you are saying, why can't I just find one then, right? If there's 54 million single people, why can't I find the one? Well, sometimes it takes time, especially when you know who you are and what your values are. Now, about 50 million Americans have tried online dating. That's what in national surveys they've disclosed. They said, yeah, I've tried it. All right, mixed results maybe, but I've tried it. About $3 billion is generated annually via online dating sites. And I want to caution us about this because there are about 8,000 dating sites worldwide. And on average, daters spend about $243 a year on membership fees for dating sites. And it seems like an exciting world of the dating sites, right? They've got dating sites for everything. You have dating sites, farmersonly.com, right? Christian singles, like all of these other things. And you can find a niche for yourself, right? Based off of the values that you're looking for. That's great. But I would also caution us to consider, right, that the business of the dating world in terms of its online function is just that, it's a business. If $3 billion are generated annually, right, amongst all these 8,000 dating sites, then it means it's also a business. The idea isn't necessarily of a dating site to guarantee outcomes for you, but rather to draw you to the site and pay membership fees. So I want us to consider that while it's okay to get excited about the options that you have to engage in online dating, enter into that realm with a grain of salt, right? A small amount of doubt to say I have to be careful though, for several reasons. We'll talk about some of those in the coming slides here, but I need to be cautious because this is still a business, right? People aren't opening dating sites solely for the purpose of saying my goal is to help you find your soulmate. That's what they may advertise. But the reality is they're saying, well, it is to find a soulmate and it's also to make money. So we just want to balance that when we discuss this topic, right? So I want to throw some statistics out there. I want to see what you think about these topics. I want to ask you the question, what do you think people use online dating for? Why are they engaging in online dating? Now, some of you in class, I've heard a number of answers. I've heard things like, well, maybe they're looking for hookups. Maybe they're just looking for a friend, right? They're on a dating site just to meet someone with similar interests and they'll see where it goes, but not necessarily to find a partner immediately, right? What do you think most people in the United States are using dating for, online dating for? All right, let me show you some statistics. You might be surprised by these, okay? So most people, 24% of online daters said, yeah, I'm here to find hookups, right? Interesting. Now, some of you are saying, hey, that number seems a little low, right? Want you to kind of fan out. This includes all online dating sites, right? So some dating sites, right, they're designed for the purpose of bringing folks together for this priority. But not all dating sites are like that, right? There's other dating sites that are saying we're not interested in facilitating hookups. We're interested in facilitating connection, intimacy, long-term relationships. So when you consider all the online dating sites available, 24% are saying this, or maybe those 24% are the only honest ones, right? And maybe there's more out there that are saying, no, I would do that, but I'm just not going to click that box, right? 43% of individuals said, I'm engaging in online dating sites to find friends. 84% said, no, I'm here for a relationship, right? Whether that be short-term, long-term, maybe you don't know, but I want to find compatibility and intimacy with another person, and that's why I'm on these sites. 30% of online daters are between the years of 18 and 29. So about 30%, right, are in this 18 to 29 years old, where most of you may fall into that category. 16% make about 30,000, between 30,000 and 75,000 a year. Okay, so big distribution of what people make in terms of their income regarding dating. So might have been surprising to you, right? Second bit of data I want to share for you that shows in our online dating research is who uses online dating more. Do you think that's men or women? Who do you think uses online dating more? Think about that for a second. You got your answer? All right, let's take a look at the data. Turns out men, 62% of dating app users are men. 13% of American men have used a dating app or site versus only 9% of American women. We're talking about American now, right? Like in a context of our country. Interesting, right? That's a pretty big statistical jump there of 13% compared to 9%. So many more men using dating, online dating more than women. The question becomes then, what do you think the majority of online daters are looking for? Do you think they're looking for looks as their first piece of engagement, or do you think it's common interests? What do you think is most important to online daters, looks or common interests? Now, before you answer that question, think about it this way. Remember I told you our dating priorities shift throughout our lifespan, right? I will admit, like the first time that I saw my wife in class, I thought she was gorgeous, right? And I was grateful that she saw me and thought I was pretty okay looking myself, right? But we were young. We were in our 20s. I think at the time I was 19 years old actually when we first saw one another. And we had never met. We didn't know each other's names. We didn't know each other's interests, right? So we were purely going off of that. But again, this was not online dating. This was in person. We saw each other in class, okay? So on online dating, 64% of people stated they were common interests mattered more. That when they shifted to online dating, they said to themselves, 64% said, look, looks are nice, but I need to be compatible with that individual. Now, no, there could be differences between new and online and experienced daters, right? Age can make a difference in that as well. But this is what the survey was disclosing. Now, let's talk about socioeconomic patterns of mate selection. It turns out in the field of psychology, we've seen a few things related to human behavior that's been documented, and it helps explain, at least early on in our dating, Where we tend, in terms of being male, female, we tend to land based on the notion of how we're wired as human beings. So, this is more of a nature discussion that we see through research in the field of psychology related to dating and how we choose to select a partner. It doesn't mean it's the only way, right? I want to caution us to say this isn't what every person is looking for or does, but what it shows is there's a general pattern, right, by gender of how we select mates. Men and women tend to, in terms of from a psychological standpoint, first judge attractiveness when pursuing further contact. So they tend to look at attractiveness first and say, I find that person attractive, and maybe now I'm open to having a conversation with them. But I also want to caution us, what does attractive mean? Does that mean looks? Does that mean personality? If it means looks, we all find different things attractive, right? We're all different people. So it doesn't mean that it has to conform with what we consider the mainstream or the dominant concepts of beauty or attractiveness, right? So I also want to be careful when we say that we first judge on attractiveness and you immediately go to, well, then that means a person needs to look like A, B, and C, right? Instead, what we're saying is, but to be attracted to a person, whether it's their personality, their humor, their charisma, right, their looks, that needs to be present. Men, what we see, tend to prefer a younger mate and assign greater value to physical attractiveness and domestic skills. We've seen this throughout mate selection from a psychological standpoint. This thought tends to be attributed to signaling fertility, like if a male wants to have a family later and get married, they're saying, okay, this partner may be more likely to have children. That's something that I want later, and an ability to care for offspring. Again, very much in that nature conversation, more of a primal discussion there, right? Women tend to be more cautious. What we see in psychology is women choose to be more cautious and choosier than men when they're selecting a mate. Now, generally, women assign greater importance to earning potential, intelligence, height, moral character, and seek mates who are all the same or slightly older. Now I get why my wife was interested in me, right? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm probably none of those things when I was 19. So just something to think about. Now, characteristics they're interested in that may increase the likelihood of a woman's offspring being willing to survive. Remember when I talked about our theorists, I talked about Darwinism, and I talked about the notion of survival of the fittest. In order for a species to perpetuate, they have to be able to reproduce, but also survive right out in the wild. So a woman in a very sort of nature, primal instinct may look and say, look, this mate that I'm choosing to select or express an interest in, they need to be able to protect me and my offspring later on in life. And that may be coming from a place of saying, but because the species literally needs to continue, okay? So let's go back to online dating. Let's talk about lying on profiles. So online dating can be, right, a tool that daters use to add to their tool belt in order to select a partner or meet a partner, a potential partner. But I said before, we have to be careful, right, about the use of online data. Some technology may have benefits to it, but we also want to be careful because inherent, sometimes even with benefits, technology has some things that we want to be aware of and be cautious of. So I want to give you some statistics in terms of lying on online dating profiles, right? Men tend to lie in online dating profiles mostly about money. 40% of men lied about their position at work or income to appear to be more successful than they actually were. In terms of women, by gender, tend to lie more about age. About 20% of women have used a photo from when they were younger onto their current dating site, their dating profile picture, even though they are older now than what the picture portrays, okay? Now, we want to be careful too, because we also see some evidence, quite a bit of evidence of infidelity present in online dating. Of the 62% of online users, 51% were married and 11% were currently in a relationship. And they were on online dating sites to meet someone else. I want to be careful about that. Now, on Tinder specifically, 42% of users currently have a partner. And now 30% of those were married and 12% were in a relationship. So you see how it can depend, that distribution, on what site you are on and what those individuals on that dating site are using that site for. In addition to that, there's also good reasons why, if you engage in online dating, you also want to be safe, right? The reality is that online dating may be convenient, right? You have your phone there, you're reading profiles, you're looking at pictures, and you're saying to yourself, maybe this could be someone that I can build a relationship with, or at least I'd just like to meet them. But we want to be careful with online dating for a few reasons. Online hookups have been on the increase due to accessibility and the ease of technology in meeting other individuals. 4 out of 5 sexual encounters do not include condoms. STI rates are up across the country as a result of this increase in online dating and hookups. 1 in 4 online daters have reported being instant messaged or direct messaged, right, by someone on a dating site who made them feel uncomfortable or harassed. And so what we see is individuals seem to feel like it's okay to communicate in an inappropriate way with another online dater via instant messaging or direct messaging, DMing, right? Online dating scams have cost victims $50 million annually, ranging from helping from the heart, that's what it's called, is helping from the heart, saying, hey, I just really need some help, I'm going through a rough time. They pretend like they're off to this big start, they're lying about who they were on their dating, and they're saying, could you maybe loan me, I just trust you so much, and you seem to understand me, could you loan me like $200 for a vet bill, right? And that other person is saying, oh, I feel so bad for them, and I feel like I trust them, they really know me. Sure, let me wire you $200, right? Turns out that's not what they need it for. Turns out the person they're wiring it to is not who they're portraying in their online profile. Sextortion, right, is something that's big and very prominent that I've seen, unfortunately, in working with young adults. Through my work as a social worker, where I've seen is that individuals prey on younger adults. They convince young adults to send inappropriate pictures, right, either through social media platforms or directly through texting. And as a result of that, they then turn around and say, if you don't give me this money, right, or you don't give me this credit card information, or you don't do A, B, and C, I'm going to release these pictures to other members, friends in your social media network, or whatever the case is, and they threaten the release of those pictures. We have to be very careful about that, right? The other piece is costs associated with site removal and online content. So as people engage in this process of being scammed, right, and the pictures are out there or the money is being taken, then the person, the dater, is paying additional fees, money, to get that content pulled down or to seek prosecution of that individual. So we have to be careful for those reasons. Another statistic is that 1 in 10 profiles are fake in online dating. 1 in 10 sex offenders are also on a dating site. So we want to be careful, right? While there are individuals that have good intentions, innocent intentions to find someone and connect with them on an intimate level, you also have people that you need to be careful about that are not predators, right? And taking advantage of individuals. And finally, online predators commit about 16,000 abductions, 100 murders, and 1,000 and thousands of sexual assaults a year. That reality is unfortunate because I've seen that in my own practice in working with clients who met an individual in person that they met online. They hadn't vetted that person, done FaceTime, called on the phone, or anything. They met them just in person right away. And as a result, it was unfortunate that they experienced some sort of sexual assault. And so it can lead to very traumatic events, that impact you over your lifetime. So I always tell folks, especially younger adults, that the online dating platform is not going away, right? It's here. However, many people are saying, I choose to use it because there's a convenience factor to it. It increases my chances of finding someone that I may love later on. At the same time, please use caution, right? If you choose to move into this notion of online dating. Now, I want to shift our discussion into sexual orientation. So we talked a little about dating, the shift to online dating, and I want to discuss sexual orientation. Now, I want to follow up with a couple of things. There was one discussion, I'm sorry, that we had around gender identity and expression early on in the semester, right? So I want to make some distinctions before we move into sexual orientation, and we're also going to discuss a little about the LGBTQ plus community and how to help them as helping professionals, right? Future nurses, speech pathologists. But I want to clarify, we spoke about gender and gender expression earlier in the semester, right? And we distinguished between gender and sex. And I want to remind us, when we talked about gender, right? We talked about gender identity as the innermost concept of being of self as male or female or a blend of both or neither, how individuals perceive themselves and what they call themselves. One's gender identity can be the same or different from the sex they're assigned at birth. So we talked a little bit about that notion. Remember, we also talked about context of culture and the time period that we are in, right? And so gender is different from sexual orientation. Sexual orientation, when we're talking about this, is the inherent or immutable, enduring emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. Those two things are separate, right? So my gender, right, I'll use myself as an example, is male, identify as male, cisgender. Cisgender just literally comes from the Latin term cis, which just means same side. So when we say someone's cisgender, when I say I'm cisgender, what it says is that I was assigned male gender at birth. I am also was born anatomically male and I identify as male. So all of those things, same side, they line up. Okay. But that's different from my sexual orientation in terms of who I choose to pursue intimacy with and who I find attractive. My sexual orientation is heterosexual. I'm a male who finds female, right, attractive, right? So those two are different. We're going to focus on sexual orientation for today in our discussion, okay? Now, psychological, I'm going to start with the secular, and then we'll move on to some scriptural discussions too. Evidence suggests that sexual orientation is a complex interplay of genetic, physiological, environmental factors. Remember what I talked about nature versus nurture? So sometimes individuals say, well, look, sexual orientation, maybe that's how we're wired from birth. Other people may say, you know what, it's solely environment. It's nurture, right? It's how environment, the words we use, the laws that we may have or don't, right? They send a message to an individual, and that individual is influenced by society. What research shows us in the field of psychology is that sexual orientation is a complex interplay of nature and nurture. Okay, it's all of our genetic physiological components and it's all of our environmental factors. Those two come together. It's not one or the other. Okay, so a couple of things to consider. Evidence also suggests in the field of psychology that contrary to Freudian theory, that homosexuality and a non-cisgender identities are not incorrect because they see evidence of these same practices in other species around globally, right? Now, again, let me remind you, my job is to bring you the psychological, the secular background and research on these topics. The goal isn't to pull you in one side or the other. My goal isn't to shame anyone or tell anyone you have to believe this or you cannot believe that. What the goal is to do is present you with this context so you're familiar with what the field of psychology says around these topics. I blend that, right? Integrate that with our Christian worldview, and I give you all of that information so you can make an informed decision for yourself, right? And so that's what we're doing here. That's all we're doing. Now, in terms of terminology, so the reason why you want to be familiar with a little bit of terminology, there is a lot more terminology associated with the current LGBTQ plus community, okay? But for the sake of time and the purpose of this course isn't to become necessarily proficient in all terminology related to the LGBTQ plus community, but you do want to know a little bit of it because I guarantee over the course of your career, you will work with members of the LGBTQ plus community. Over my career of 18 years serving as a social worker, I certainly had the honor of serving individuals of the community. And what we say, how we use our words, right, those matter to individuals. How we address individuals, our understanding of what some of this terminology means is important. And so if we're going to serve clients well and honor their dignity, we want to be familiar with some of the terminology. Some of the terminology that I'm going over today is just a few terms. Same gender loving is a term used in the community that is preferred sometimes to use instead of lesbian, gay, bisexual, which expresses an attraction or love to people of the same gender. So previously you may be familiar with the term lesbian or gay or bisexual. Same gender loving may encompass those three terms. Asexual is a term referred to individuals who say, I don't have a sexual attraction or desire to other people. Now, when someone may identify as asexual, we don't want to clump all of this and say all, but some individuals who identify as asexual may say, I still seek intimacy. I still want to be with someone in a relationship. I still want to have an intimate connection with someone. However, the sexual notion of that relationship isn't present, right? Asexuality is, I don't seek an intimate physical relationship with my partner. In terms of bisexual, some of you are pretty familiar with this, right? A person is emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to one or more sex, gender, or gender identity, right? So it can be simultaneously or dating one partner. Okay, so that's a definition there. Now, some of you may be familiar with or haven't heard of the notion of pansexual. Now, pansexuality is described as someone who has the potential for emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to people of any gender. But what happens is that it's really about the connection first. So an individual, and I've worked with individuals who I've identified as pansexual, have said, Antonio, I am attracted to the person first and their personality. I have to get to know them. I have to trust them. I have to know that they have those values. I have to feel safe with them. I have to feel loved. Whether that is a person who identifies as male or female, that actually is not my first priority. It's about the connection first, whichever and wherever that looks across gender. Okay. Now, I want to caution us with the next term, and that's the term queer. Now, I want to be careful with this term. In the academic realm, right, of higher education, research, cultural studies, the term queer can be used. You see institutions sometimes that say, we offer queer studies or a degree like something like that, or a concentration in queer studies. There's still a realm in academia which that word is used. And the term is often used to express fluid identities and orientations, often used interchangeably with LGBTQ. Okay, so it's more of a broad term, similar to say, if you say, members of the LGBTQ plus community, queer is meaning outside of the norm. And so you're saying that queer is referring to that group. But I want to caution us, and this is particularly why. Some of you may know, though, that this term has also been used synonymously with insults, right? With harm to be done intentionally by calling people this name and using it as an insult to subjugate, discriminate, and cause harm to other individuals, to bully, right? Like what we talked about earlier. And so, because I am not a member of the LGBTQ plus community, I personally do not choose to use this word, right, in my practice. There have been plenty of times where my clients have come to me and they've shared, I identify as a member of, as queer, as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And they've literally said to me at times, Antonio, I'm okay with the term. If you want, you can use it. And I say to them, first off, it's genuine. I say, I thank you for that. Thank you for your trust. Thank you for knowing where my heart is in honoring your dignity, right? And at the same time, I'm not a member of the community. This word has historically been used by heterosexual individuals to cause harm to others. I don't want to do that, right? And so if it's okay, I'm preferred to be comfortable like addressing you by your name. And that usually works. That's just fine, right? And so I want to share that. Even though we need to be familiar with the term, I'm asking us to be familiar with it so we actually don't unintentionally perpetuate harm, right, against the community. Second word is question, or the last word is questioning. And questioning is a term used to describe people who are in the process of exploring their sexual orientation or gender identity. It could be either of those or both, right? So they're saying, I'm just grappling with a few things right now. I'm not sure, right, where I'm landing in terms of my gender orientation, my gender identity or sexual orientation. I'm in a questioning phase of that, okay? And so I'm sharing these terms with you because these are not uncommon terms that you are going to hear out when you're in your practice. And I just want you to have an understanding of them, right? So that you can understand the background of of the clients that you are serving, okay? All right, now, many people have said, Dr. Manko, I get this question a lot. Is it sexual preference or sexual orientation? What's the proper terminology here? Now, we know that terminology impacting vulnerable populations, that includes like race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, all of that. It changes, over the years. So I can't always say that the term is going to be sexual orientation. I don't know what's going to happen 10 years from now, but I can tell you currently, we've moved away from the process of sexual preference and we've moved to the notion of sexual orientation. And there's a couple of reasons for that, right? Let me ask you these questions, right? Do you remember when you woke up one morning and actively chose your race, right? For many of us, we didn't, right? I didn't wake up in the morning, look into the mirror and say, yeah, Dr. Mako, today you're going to be mixed race. Let's go mixed race, right? Because I'm a mix, right, of different races. I didn't wake up one morning and actively choose my gender. I didn't. Okay. Some people may have had an experience where they were in that questioning phase, right? And they eventually understood what their gender meant to them. But for me, I didn't wake up in the morning and actively choose and say, you know what, Antonio, you're going male. We're going to go male for the rest of your life, right? I didn't wake up and choose my sexual identity. I didn't choose up and say one day, I'm going to wake up today, this morning, and decide I'm going to only be sexually attracted to females, right? Society may often assume that or gender identity, sexual orientation are selected or preferred, right? When in reality, preference really means that we made an active decision, but that's not necessarily the case for everyone. So when we say sexual preference, it's like saying I had an active choice in that. Whereas for many of us, what we're saying is that that wasn't the case. I didn't actively choose, I just knew who I was. And so now our language has shifted over into sexual orientation, right? So we want to be careful to understand that when we address someone, right, someone from the LGBTQ plus community, they may not say, this is my sexual preference. To say, because I'm not choosing to live this life because it's not convenient, right? I worry about what people think of me when they know my identity. I'm worried about how me and my partner might be treated if we're out in public, right? I wouldn't choose that life for myself in terms of all of the external oppression that takes place. So it's not about me preferring it, but it's who I am. Okay. So that would be the language, right? The perception, right? Coming from some of my clients in the past. So just something to keep in mind. Now, there are a couple of theoretical orientations as well regarding the notion of sexual orientation that I want to share with you as well. There's two theories in particular, and they both sort of contrast, and in a way, there is a little bit of overlap between the two. The first is essentialist theory. Essentialist theory believes that sexual orientation is fixed, unitary, it's inborn in nature. So do you hear that nature discussion, right? Remember I was talking about nature, nurture? That nature discussion, and it's defined by the innate sexual and affectional attraction to another of the same opposite or both sexes. What does that mean? It says essentialist theory believes you're born wired the way you are, and that's how you choose who you are attracted, not choose, that's how you find someone attractive, okay? Then there's constructionist theory. Constructionist theory says that sexual identity is fluid and constructed by complex configurations of societal, historical, intrapsychic, and interpersonal factors. So constructionist theory pulls together a little bit of nature and nurture, but it's leaning more towards nurture. It's leaning more towards environment. Why do I bring both of these to you when they seem so distinctly different? Remember, my job is to present you with multiple theories rooted in psychology around a topic so you can be informed on it and make an informed decision, right? So I'm not pushing you towards essentialist or constructionalist, right? But I'm asking you to consider here are the theoretical frameworks, a couple that exist, right, for you to be able to kind of marinate on, digest on, give it some thought, okay? All right. Now, I do want to talk about when we stay on this lane of serving LGBTQ plus members of the community. LGBTQ plus individuals, as research in the health sciences has demonstrated, face higher risks, greater risks for certain conditions, diseases, and infections, and institutional barriers when it comes to the healthcare field. Okay. Now, there's reasons for that I'll go into now according to research. But everything that I'm giving you is related to research that's done specifically related to healthcare and serving LGBTQ plus communities. This is important for you because it's not if you will encounter someone in your nursing or speech pathology career who identifies as a member of the community. It's when, right? Because we work in a diverse area. Southern California has a really diverse and rich population. And so that includes the LGBTQ plus community. So it's helpful to know where these disparities exist in the healthcare field so you can be the best possible practitioner you can be. Now, I'm not going to read through all of them because there's a lot, but I want to highlight these, point out the ones that are highlighted. LGBTQ plus individuals, according to research, are more likely to rate their health as poor and report more chronic conditions. LGBTQ plus individuals have higher rates of HPV infection. This is what's seen across healthcare research. And according to research, LGBTQ plus individuals are more likely to be obese, and particularly gay and bisexual men are more likely to contract the HIV virus that can progress to AIDS, right, if it goes untreated. Now, I want to provide you with a few more statistics related to research that's found in the healthcare industry regarding this particular population. LGBTQ plus individuals have less access to healthcare than they need, and individuals are often less likely to have health insurance to carry that, less likely to fill prescriptions when they need them. And you can see where some of these chronic conditions begin to emerge, right? If someone has a condition and they don't treat it for an extended period of time, the condition can progress, right? They're more likely to use the emergency room or delay getting care. and individuals of the LGBTQ plus community are more likely to be refused healthcare services and be harassed by healthcare professionals. All right. Now, where are the, in addition to these statistics, there's a reason why research is trying to be done in the healthcare industry, examining more of the LGBTQ plus community in reference to healthcare. And that's because the minority status of LGBTQ plus community individuals in our nation is very small. So LGBTQ plus individuals make up a very small percentage of the total population in the United States. Now, some can say because maybe that population is really that small, but we also want to factor in that some individuals may not be comfortable disclosing their status as a member of the community out of fear, right, of harm or retribution or oppression. So as a result, that number remains low. We still have to dive into the fact of not everyone may be comfortable disclosing their status. There's a lack of specific education and training for healthcare workers regarding the LGBTQ plus community. This can make members of the community uncomfortable going in. If they're worried that a healthcare professional, a nurse, a doctor, a speech pathologist, a counselor, a social worker is unfamiliar with their needs of being a member of the community, they may say, look, I'm not comfortable going in, right? If there's no expertise in the area that impacts me, it makes me apprehensive about going and seeking care. A lack of clinical research on LGBTQ health related issues is still there. This is why we're pushing forward into research to understand this more. There are restrictive healthcare benefits sometimes at the state level that say we will honor certain procedures, we will not if you're a member of the community. There's limited role models, right? When you think about how many individuals you know who are open about their LGBTQ plus identity and maybe serve in the healthcare profession as a doctor, as a nurse, speech pathologist, a PA, they're often few and far between, right? And so there's a lack of role models there. And there's also, as I stated before, that fear that due to stigma, discrimination, or institutional bias, I'm afraid to interact with this system. All of those things can have a significant impact on an individual seeking care, and it can cause medical conditions that existed that may have been treatable early on to advance to more problematic stages, right, of that diagnosis. So we want to just consider that when we're serving this population. Finally, the last bit of data I want to share with you impacting the LGBTQ plus community around this last bullet point here, fear of due to stigma, is that individuals are aware that there's a disproportionate amount of hate crime data. This comes from the FBI related to the LGBTQ plus community. So back in the FBI reported a 17% increase of hate crimes towards transgender individuals in 2017. And of those hate crimes reported related to sexual orientation in 2017, 57.8% were victims of crimes motivated by the offender's anti-gay male bias. 24.9% were victims of anti-lesbian, gay, or bisexual, or transgender mixed group bias. What do we take from this? Is that if you're a member of the LGBTQ plus community, this last data point here, the fear of stigma, discrimination is real, right? Individuals are afraid that if they disclose their status to a doctor, to a professional, to a therapist, and if that were to get out and they were uncomfortable with that, there could also be significant repercussions for their own safety and well-being. And so that leads to an apprehension to engage in systems understandably, right? So that's what we're sharing for today. Now, want to shift our conversation. I'd like us to dive into a little bit of scripture and some considerations. Some of you, let me stop staring screen really quick and we'll have a quick conversation. Some of you may have looked at the material, the content that I presented today, and you may have said to yourselves, Dr. Mexico, I understand it now. I see it. Maybe you even think, hey, I agree with the concepts that were shared. Some of you may look at the content that I presented with you today, and you may say to yourselves, I don't agree with any of it. Maybe I'm even like a little upset, right? Again, okay, I'm not trying to pull you in one direction or the other, trying to give you all the information so that you can always make an informed decision, right, that shapes you. Now, one thing though that's consistent wherever we fall on that spectrum is that from the Christian worldview, we're called, it says, Jesus says to love our neighbor. Jesus says, love your neighbor. And it's really interesting that this word of love was used. Jesus didn't say like your neighbor. Jesus didn't say understand your neighbor. Jesus didn't say you always have to agree with your neighbor or get along with them. Jesus called us to love our neighbor. And that word love is really intentional and a powerful word. So this is where I want to pick up with the conversation. Here in the US, we have one word to describe love, right? Don't we? We say we love this, right? So for example, I love coffee. And I do. Every morning I get a cup of coffee. So happy when I get it. I love coffee. Right? I love rescue dogs, as you learned in the first lecture. I love my cars, right? Love driving cars. And I love my wife and I love my daughter. Do you see how there's different levels of love, but we only have one word to describe it? Well, in the Greek language, there's actually many different words for different types of love, but there's three most common words that we are familiar with that cross over into our awareness in our modern culture. The first type of love in the Greek language is eros. And eros is a romantic or intimate love. It's similar to like an infatuation or lust, right? You look at someone, you see them, you find them attractive. It's kind of like a how you doing kind of thing, right? And you find yourself attracted to that person. Maybe it's a physical attraction. And then there's a different type of love in the Greek language, and it's called philia. And philia is a friendship, a noble kind of love. It's when we like people that like us. We have friends that we see that worldview. We like going out to coffee. We can laugh with them. We know that they've got our backs. Philia is that friendship. But then in the Greek language, there's another type of love, and that's referred to as agape, right? Agape is a universal love. It's the love of God operating in the human heart. And therefore, as Dr. King said, we don't love people because we like them. We love people because God loves them. It's an unconditional, all-inclusive, powerful love, right? That's unrelenting, that continues to communicate a worthiness and dignity that only comes from God. And so, in our practice, if we were to blend our ethical obligations, as I said earlier in this lecture, that we have a legal and ethical obligation to serve everyone, no matter how different they are, we also recognize as Christians that we are to honor the inherent God-given dignity of every human being, no matter how different they are. We may not understand, we may not agree, but we are called to love, right? To see the person as God sees them, worthy of God's love and belonging. And that's where we meet, in that place of love as practitioners, okay? So I'd like to share a scripture verse with you that speaks powerfully about this notion of love, right? And some of you are familiar with this scripture verse. It comes to us from First Corinthians chapter 13. And I'm reading you an interpretation of uh, um, Corinthians, where it comes from the Message interpretation. So the Message interpretation is the Bible that is translated into in current language, everyday language that we use today. And I want to share this scripture for you about love as it was written by Paul when he describes the love that we are supposed to have for one another because it's the love that Jesus showed us, okay? So let me share the scripture verse with you. Listen to how Paul describes love, right? And the name of this chapter is The Way of Love, okay? Paul writes in this chapter, and very beautifully, it's a very eloquent scripture verse. If I speak with human eloquence and angelic ecstasy, but don't love, I'm nothing but a creaking of a rusty gate, right? So if you don't have love, the love that Jesus showed for you, you're just making noise, even though you're speaking eloquently. It's just noise. There's nothing behind it. Paul says, if I speak God's word with power, revealing all his mysteries and making everything plain as day, and if I have faith so as to say, move a mountain and that jump, and the mountain jumps, but I don't have love, I'm nothing. The power, the influence, it doesn't mean anything if it's not backed by God's love. If I give everything I own to the poor and even go to the stake to be burned as a martyr, but I don't love, I've gotten nowhere. You haven't made a difference, right? God's saying you didn't make a difference because you did all that for you. You didn't do it for God to glorify and to love others. So no matter what I say, what I believe, and what I do, Paul says, I am bankrupt without love. I don't have anything to give. I can be doing all of these great things, earn these titles behind my name, awards, whatever the case is. But if I'm not doing it with love, I don't hold that value for others. It says love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for self. Love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut. Love doesn't have a swelled head like a big ego. Doesn't force itself on others. It's always isn't always me first, right? Love doesn't fly off the handle. It doesn't keep score of the sins of others. It doesn't revel when others grovel. Love takes pleasure in the flowering of truth, puts up with anything, trusts God always, always looks for the best. Listen to that. God's love always looks for the best in everyone, even when we don't understand or agree. Love never looks back, but keeps going to the end. It's a love that is persistent, right? Paul goes on to say, love never dies. Inspired speech will be over one day. Praying in tongues will end. Understanding will reach its limit. We know only a portion of the truth, and what we say about God is always incomplete. How humbling is that, right? To say that everything we know about God is always going to be incomplete. We simply won't understand all of God's love until we meet God, right? But when the complete arrives, when we meet God, our incompletes will be canceled. We'll finally know. We'll finally understand. When I was an infant at my mother's breast, I gurgled and cooed like an infant. And when I grew up, I left those infant ways for good. What does Paul mean by that? So he means love matures. When he was a child, he loved like a child, right? When he got older, he loved like an adult. Remember when I was talking to you about dating? I shared with you, right, that my wife and I, our love changed over a period of 24 years. What we started with at 19 years old is different from how we are in our 40s, right? Love evolves, it matures. We don't see things clearly, right? We're squinting in a fog, peering through the mist. We're trying to understand, but it won't be long before the weather clears and the sun shines bright. We'll see it all then, see it as clearly as God sees us, knowing Him directly, just as He knows us. We have to wait. We have to wait and trust in God's definition of love. Give that love to others, give that love to ourselves. It's when we see God that we'll understand completely. And then Paul finishes by saying, but for right now, until that completeness, we have three things to do to lead us towards that consummation. Trust steadily in God, hope unswervingly. You hear that? Stay straight on this course of love, love extravagantly. Wow, what a beautiful thought. Extravagantly. You think of extravagance, right? You think of the fancy car, you think of the big house, you think of the fancy suit or dress, the watch, all these things. God's saying, like, when you're extravagant, other people notice it. They see it. It's out there. And Paul's saying, we want you to love like that. Love extravagantly for your neighbor. And he says, the best of these three, the best of them is love. How powerful is it then, right? I think we can get on board with that as Christians. Even though we don't understand or always agree, if we can love like this with our neighbor, others will come to know Christ, right? Not through our own words and our own thoughts and our education and the letters behind our name, but in how we love, right? Something to think about there. Now, before we end, I want to show you, let me see what the time is. Actually, we'll end the lesson here. We'll end the lesson here and I'll add a video onto Blackboard for you to check out, which will be pretty inspirational, and I'll add that there. But for the sake of time, then let's go ahead and end with our centering verse for today. We're going to end with a beautiful scripture verse, right, that speaks to the notion of holding faith, right, even in times where it may feel difficult. We're going to go from Jeremiah chapter 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you hope and a future. Folks, I want to thank you so much for sticking with all the content that I'm giving you this semester. You all are absolutely wonderful. So what I want to do is end our lesson in that standard centering exercise that we always do. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and put your hands and feet in a nice, comfortable position. And I'm going to ask you to take that nice deep breath and let's just breathe in and let's just settle into that extravagant love that God is sharing with us every day, right? From that Paul's scripture there. Let's close our eyes and exhale. And let's be present in this place of love with God. And God's telling us, I know the plans that I have for you, right? I want to give you plans that are going to make you prosper. I don't want you to worry, right? I'm not going to harm you. I'm going to give you hope in a future. Take one more nice deep breath. Stay in that presence of God for just a couple of moments, and we will come right back. All right, go ahead and take that nice deep breath. You can open your eyes and come on back. Folks, you are fantastic. Know that I'm here for you. If you need anything, email me. We'll set up office hours. We'll grab that cup of coffee. Thank you all so much. You have a wonderful week. God bless.